Hi everyone, I'm Erica Corona. Thank you for joining me today on my podcast about my book called Restored. Today I invited to the conversation my daughter. We wanted to give the angle of a child, of a teen, of a young adult walking through this process with a parent, walking through a health crisis with a parent. And we wanted to bring the point of counting it all joy, as the word says. As we go through many trials, count it all joy. And we want to see, how does that look like? What does that look like? And how does God work that up in our lives? So thank you for listening today. And I pray that this will bless you today. Noelani, welcome.
Hello.
So I want to start the conversation. Your dad and I started ours as well with the same topic, talking about how was it for you when you first received the news about the cancer?
First word that comes to mind is heartbroken. And, seeing how it was already affecting you when you were crying when sharing the news. Or rather, Bobby was more so sharing the news or explaining some things to us, and being that strength in that moment. But I kind of just didn't know how that was going to look like for us. So a lot of questions, and I was kind of like, what does this mean for us? I can't even cook. Like, is she going to be able to cook? Like, what is this going to look like? I didn't know. So it was more so like a state of shock, and more so not knowing anything or having a lot of questions.
Yeah. I'm a little bit of a crybaby. It was hard because it's hard to tell, the hardest thing for me was to tell you guys first, hard to tell my parents because we were also in the pandemic, and it's like, okay, I'm supposed to be here caring for them during this difficult time, but here I am in a fragile state. And it was hard for me because of that, guys. So that was really hard for us. So we did wait to have all kind of figured out as far as my diagnosis to bring it to you guys. And I want you to talk a little bit about that, the pandemic. I mean, now you had to homeschool, finish college at home, and, dealing with your, not missing your friends, and helping us with your siblings, and having to take on a little bit more responsibility in the house in that sense.
Yeah, I think there was good and bad with it being the pandemic, right? And I think the bad was the isolation from everything else, but it also, in the same breath, was the good, because we got to really be home and focus on family, which is kind of what we needed to do in that time. So it was both good and bad being isolated in that way, because I felt very isolated from community. At the church, everything was through Zoom, and eventually, truthfully, I stopped going on the Zoom calls, and because it just felt disconnected to me, and probably wasn't the best decision in the moment, but it is a decision that I made in the pandemic, to kind of just get off and disconnect from all the Zoom meetings that the young adults were having. I know we always watch Sunday service together, but other than that, I wasn't connecting with my community at that time. So that was the bad part. But connecting with family and with you guys and with the kids was the good part of it. Being able to just deal with it together.
Right. Yeah. But how do you feel? How did this impact your faith, or did it impact your faith in any way? Having to receive this news that your mom was going through this health crisis, and how did you see God work through it?
It definitely impacted my faith. I think at that point, being 20 years old, coming into being a woman, I was still very much a kid in my head. So going through this, hearing this news, it made me realize how weak my faith was, because it felt very broken at the time. And because I had so many questions and felt so out of, like, I didn't have any control over the situation. It really pressed into a lot of my doubts surrounding the Lord and trusting him. So it really led me to reanalyze, where my faith was. And I had to dissect that. And I would say during the pandemic too was the first time that I really dug into the word on my own. So that was a huge breakthrough. And at the same time, it was where my faith felt the weakest. So I had a wonderful cousin who came to visit me right before everything shut down, and he had heard the news of your diagnosis. He came to see me, and he spoke to me, and he was like, you need to start reading your word. Like, just you and God, like, you need to have that time with him. And it was very convicting, and it was very encouraging, because I knew that where my thoughts were running to was just negative and was just doubtful. And, my faith hadn't been on a firm foundation, It had been on, this is what I've grown up in and known my whole life. I've always known the Lord, and a lot of it was my parents' faith too, because I saw how strong you and Papi's faith was. I really leaned into that, and I really was encouraged by that. And, looking back in my life, like, the Lord was there when I was 5 years old, and he was there when I was 10 years old. Like, I had many moments with the Lord, even at young ages, but I think I just wasn't old enough to really understand what a relationship with him looked like.
Making your own choices for that.
And making my own choices with that, and having a real relationship with Christ. And I had to really look at that and look deeper into what a relationship with Jesus looked like. And I remember the first book of the Bible that I read in 2020 by myself was Romans. And the first chapter that I read, I wrote a little note here. And it said, the righteous shall live by faith. So it's Romans 1:16. It says, for I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith. As it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. And I wrote here, keep your faith, and faith in capital letters. And I really was trying to hold on to that, even when I felt so far away from it. And looking back at this note, I was like, let me see what I wrote in here back then. I wrote so many things just about faith, like true faith, keep your faith, grow in faith, like all these words, and notes that I took from that. And I know that that's when my faith really started to grow in my adulthood.
As an adult, you're saying all that, and it reminds me, I cited in the book a quote by C.S. Lewis from A Grief Observed, and he says in the quote that your faith is not being tested by God, because he already knew. He already knows what we're going to go through, how we're going to respond, where our faith is at, right? It is us that didn't know. So I think that we can apply that in saying, first of all, like the word says, God turns everything into good, right?
Yeah.
God will make everything work for good for those who love him. And in this situation for you, I think it's the Lord challenging you. He took that opportunity at that moment when we were going through that, where your faith was shaken by what was happening with our family, with your mom. And he allowed to use that for good in challenging you in taking that step for yourself, right?
Yeah.
In digging deeper into your faith and drawing nearer to him and growing with him. So we could definitely see that applied in your life.
Yeah.
We saw you being challenged, and that was painful for me because we didn't want our children's faith to be rocked because of this. We didn't want it to be affected because of this. That's part of the pain that you feel when you're going through a crisis like that. That's going to affect them. And then to see all that God has done in your life since then is beautiful, you know, to see how God is using you. And I don't know if you want to speak into that a little bit.
I mean, now 2024, almost 2025, so much more involved with my community, at our church, City Rev, and, you know, lead a young adult woman's Bible study. I'm a leader at our young adults, which I was disconnecting from in 2020. I was hanging up the Zoom calls for in 2020. Little did I know how invested I would be in that community, and how much they've blessed me, really, since then. And really understanding the importance of community and having that and leaning on that, especially in those times, because I chose to disconnect from that. I think I truly understand now how important it is to stay connected with your community. So the Lord has done a lot of things, and never did I imagine being a leader in that way here. So the Lord has proven again and again that He is perfect and holy and good and trustworthy. And when we lean on Him and trust in Him and not ourselves, not our own feelings, not our own judgment, He really shines through in that. You know, in the book also, I talk about the story of Joseph. And I emphasize on the verse on Genesis 50:20, where it says, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So basically, in a nutshell, that's basically saying what it says in Romans: God works everything for good for those who love Him, right? And it's just a little more specific into a purpose God brings in us being able to stand by others, be there for others, pour into others, right? Because there's so much that is brought out of a crisis like this. For me, of course, I would have never chosen this for my life. I would have never chosen for this to be a part of my story, but God allowed it. And I know now that through it, I learned so much and understand so many things. So much of God's word was brought to life for me. So much of His promises, so many verses that it's like, oh God, that's what you meant with this. And so much that I was been able to draw out of it. And so much I have been able to even pour out for others. Had I not gone through this, perhaps could not arrive to where I am right now. Yeah.
You know, and seeing God work in that. And I think that, you know, that speaks into your experience a little bit as well. Some of it, had you not maybe experienced that with us, so much maybe was drawn out from you to pour into others through that experience. So much that you did working in your faith, digging into God's word, getting to know your Father more, leaning more into Him. Maybe it wasn't the thing you did the first couple days, but as God went working in your life, you went drawing into that. And the same I can say for myself. And that's how we see God working things for good. He wants to, in the end, like the word says, count it all joy, right? Count it all joy when you go through many trials. And it's talking about not that we're going to find joyful going through cancer. That's not joyful. Not that we're going to find joyful feeling pain or sadness because of it. But we're going to find joy in what God works in us, right? We're going to find joy in seeing now what God has done through our journey, what God has worked up in us through our journey. The joy in finding that I can call up my friend's friend that just got a diagnosis and pray for her and encourage her in her faith and bring her the book and tell her, look, this is what God did in me. God can also restore your faith. God can also bring you to faith, right? Because that's also something that I feel that God can work up through my story and through the book and help encourage others to find God through their journey, right?